Hey all, hope all's well. This is another video in the Road to Grandmaster series, and this one I'm covering my round 9 game from the Marshall GMIM Invitational. Now, if you followed my round 8 game, you know that I drew a really tough one with white against International Master Alexander Ostrovsky, and I was very fortunate to draw that one. I was in a world of trouble with white again, and this tournament just really hasn't been my tournament. Yeah, this was the last round. I was hoping to end it on a good note, but I will say in advance here that I think I learned something about final round games from this particular match and my tournament previously. And I think the issue I've had with them is I'm not playing well in them. I'm not taking them seriously enough, as serious enough as I do the first round game, and it really demonstrated a lack of maturity on my part that I needed to correct going into future tournaments. Now, you might say, wow, that's really wild. That might be kind of harsh. The truth is I did not bring the same level of urgency to the ninth round as I did to the first round or the second round or even the third round. And I think part of the reason is because when you have a last round game, particularly in a tournament where you haven't been killing it, you're thinking about what the incentive is to do well in that last round. And honestly, the incentive should still be, hey, you're playing for rating. This game still matters. But what I think I had been doing is like thinking, if I'm not in the running for a GM norm or if I'm not been having a good tournament, well, I can just do anything. And it's not true. I mean, basically what happens is you lose your 5 points from a loss or your 6 points. Those are 5 and 6 very hard, difficult points to get back. So just having that level of urgency every round is something that is, really key. And we're going to see that I kind of lack that in this one. Now, I will say this. A lot of people talk about draws in the last round, and I'm not that type of player. I'm not someone that agrees to short draws almost ever. I just don't believe in it. I actually hate draws in general, so I don't really play for them. But even so, you shouldn't be throwing away games or playing super recklessly. You should play the same type of game you always played. And I kind of had an itch I wanted to scratch, but this was not the moment to try it. Now, anyways, that's a long-winded prologue, but you're going to understand why I'm saying all this in a bit. My opponent in this game was the wonderkin, the young prodigy international master Christopher Yu. Now, if you haven't heard of him, he's a young American player from California that he's born in 2006, so he's either 12 or 13 years old. I'm not sure, but he's already 2,400 FIDE and just a huge talent and very tactically gifted. So very dangerous opponent. This guy had the white pieces, and I had to be alert. So let's see what happened. So Christopher opened with e4, which he normally does. I played e6, the French, d4, d5, and knight c3. And I was actually thinking about, what I would be doing and when someone played knight c3. I hadn't really faced this in a while. You might have seen some previous videos where I got McCutcheon-type systems with knight f6. But there was a particular line of the French I was really curious about, and I had been wanting to try it in a game against a strong opponent. But I did not do enough research to justify me just trying it. And I think, honestly, it being the ninth round just kind of influenced my decision. If it was the third round, I probably wouldn't have done this. But I was like, I just want to see how this would go. Dumb decision. I went bishop b4, and this was the French winnower. This is not necessarily a bad opening, but my idea was not well thought out. He went e5, which is normal. I went c5, which is also normal. You're trying to undermine the pawn chain as quickly as possible. And now white plays a3, and this is theory. I went bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and the normal move in this position is either knight e7 or queen c7, introducing the poison pawn lines. Just to give you an example of knight e7, queen g4, queen c7, and you give up this g7 pawn, and then the h7 pawn, and you get this type of setup where I believe it's like knight e2 takes and f4, And yeah, this type of French winner position can be very, very sharp. Basically, white has the two bishops, which, as we know, are assets, but black has a very tricky position with potential activity with the rook on g8, the knight on f5, bishop comes to d7, black might even castle, and the white king is stuck on e1 for a long time. So it's a very, very tricky dynamic position with chances for both sides, although white is typically better in these structures. I wasn't trying to go for the absolute main line of the winnower. My thought process, my idea was actually a sideline that I'd seen and thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. And it was the move queen a5. Now, the idea with queen a5 is very concrete. The point is that after bishop d2, which, defends the c3 pawn, it's to play queen a4. And the point here is very positional. The idea is that this queen on a4 is actually pretty interesting because it stops white from going a4. It also eyes the c2 pawn in some lines. And in many positions, black is actually angling to close the structure with c4 and get a closed position in which black is essentially arguing that the two bishops don't matter as much. And the a3 pawn might be a weakness in the endgame if the center is closed. So that's kind of the argument with queen a4. Now, the downside to it is that, you're moving your queen multiple times. You've given up the bishop pair, which, again, we say is an asset. And your king side is a little bit sensitive because, the knight can't go to the most natural square, f6. And this g6 pawn is also g7 pawn is a little bit loose. So white, aims to punish that right away by going queen g4. And frankly, this was a move I had not looked at enough. I had considered queen b1, which was a old line that had been played before, and I was going to reply with c4, just closing off the bishop b5 check ideas. Similarly, rook b1 is also an idea, and again with bishop b5 check in the cards, and I was going to play c4. But I did not really thoroughly look at the consequences of queen g4. And so after this move, on move 8, I was on my own. And, to be on your own this early in such a sharp position is not a good idea. And again, it's just a lack of discipline on my part going for this in the 9th round. So anyways, I went, you have two ways to try and defend this pawn on g7. One is to play g6, and another is to play king f8. Now, the issue with g6 is, your dark squared bishop is gone, and so you really have sensitive squares if you play g6. And I was not keen on, weakening my whole king side. So I went king f8. But, the issue with king f8 is that you're not castling, and that means it's going to be a lot harder to connect your rooks. And it's just a very, very risky decision. White went queen d1 back, funnily enough, just to cover the c2 pawn. And, he's essentially arguing, my job there was done. I forced your king to f8. I'm a happy camper. I went knight e7, continuing to try to just develop. Now that my queen is on a4, my king's on f8, I thought, okay, I need to actually move some of my other pieces off the back rank. White went knight f3, and I went b6. And, again, I was still playing a little bit too nonchalant. I thought that I would go for this positional idea, which is to trade these bishops. Normally trading the c8 and f1 bishop is pretty good, the light squared bishops, because usually this light squared bishop is a real menace on this diagonal. But there's just not time for it. I'm not developed, and I need to be more urgent with my play. And the other issue with b6 is it allows for white to open up the position favorably, which Chris did without even really thinking too much, which was d takes c5. And the point is, after d takes c5 and b takes c5, which I played, that now the b file is a real nice source of counterplay for white. And, again, my c5 pawn might also be a little bit sensitive. My structure just doesn't make a lot of sense. Instead of actually taking on c5 with the b pawn, I could have actually considered bishop a6 and playing almost like a Benko style game where I gambit a pawn for some activity and try to develop my pieces. And this actually would have been a better try because, again, white's pawn structure is not actually that good. So if I try to, develop quickly, it might be worth a pawn. So I probably should have gone for that. I took, and this was a poor decision because now white played c4. And you can see that he's just ripping open my center, and I'm just not ready for it. I'm really not ready for this. So really, really good moves by Christopher and really bad decision making on my part. I went knight c6 trying to hurry up with my development, and Chris played bishop e2. Note that b takes c4 is not very desirable for me because I just would open more lines, and these double pawns don't mean so much. So not something I want to do. I went h6 here, which again seems like very slow and probably is, but I was not keen on having a knight or a bishop come to the g5 square, so I thought it was important to cover it. And then in some lines, I was also entertaining the king g8, king h7 walk to salvation, pretty much, where my king, maybe helps connect my rooks that way with artificial castling. White castled, and I went king g8, and again, a little bit too slow for this, but it is what it is. And after c takes d5, I went e takes d5, and you can see here that the material is equal. We actually both have the same amount of pawn islands. I mean, it's pretty much 3 to 3. And white has the two bishops, and his king is safer. So definitely better for white. And I might try and hold on potentially if I put my bishop on e6 or f5 and claw my way out, but because I do have reasonable pawns here, but I don't buy it. This position is not good. White went rook b1, which is an excellent move, taking advantage of that, that open file pretty much. And I went bishop a6, which really is, again, just a lack of judgment and kind of signals my downfall. Now, if I wanted to stay in the game, bishop f5 made a whole lot of sense. Again, I want to put my king on h7, but, I can't allow bishop d3 check. So you put the bishop on f5 to control that diagonal. Then you go king h7, and maybe once my rooks are connected, I actually have a playable position. Now, the reason I was reluctant to play bishop f5 is I didn't love this rook coming to b7 in a lot of lines. Like, I just was very wary about something like this. But it's not actually the end of the world right now. I mean, I have queen takes c2, king h7 again is a possibility. Not the end of the world. Instead, after bishop a6, I went with this plan of, trading these bishops. And the issue is that, this is a desirable trade, but I'm just not ready for it. There are too many other circumstances that matter, in particular my king position, and I'm just not in time for it. And so Christopher played bishop takes, and after queen takes, he thought for a little while, and then played the move that I saw instantly when I got to this position. I was like, oh my god, what am I going to do if this happens? And the move was e6. The point is that you essentially blast open my king side before I'm fully coordinated, and I'm just not ready for this break. And the issue is if I ignore this pawn, well, he's going to go e takes f7, and I didn't think I could play a move like f6 and tolerate it just staying there, because then there's a weak light squares over here. This maybe rook comes in. I just was like, ugh, this is not good. So I actually took the pawn on e6 and accepted the challenge, but you can see here that now this e6 pawn is backward. It's hard to imagine I'm going to get an e5. And after the simple rook e1, it's just really hard to defend this one, and I'm just in a world of pain. I went king h7 anyway, trying to get my king out, but after rook takes e6, the material is equal. My queen is offside. My knights are clumsy and can't move because they're just protecting each other. And, there's just way too many tactical possibilities in this position. Look at the rook pointing here, the knight pointing here, the bishop pointing here, this rook on the b file, the queen might come into the game. Whew, just really, really tough. Instead of playing king h7, I could have tried queen c8, protecting the pawn temporarily and just moving my queen a bit closer to the king, because you see in a lot of circumstances the king getting attacked with decisive effect when the queen is far away. So I should have brought that king back. Anyways, after rook takes e6, I went rook hb8, still nonchalantly trying to trade pieces and thinking that things were going to be rosy. And now white went rook a1, which is a really, really nice move. Just kind of saying, you know what, I'm not going to trade pieces with you. And now your rook on b8 is really, really clumsy and silly, and it's blocking the other one on a8. So I thought rook a1 was a really, really nice move and good judgment by, can I say the preteen? Good judgment by the preteen, because I think he was 12 at this time. I went queen c8 now, and that was the idea of my being in the rook on left rook over, because I could have actually gone in the previous position, rook a b8, but my thought process was I wanted to go queen c8, and I wanted those rooks to be connected. So that's why I went rook fb8, and then queen c8, but this is a little bit too elaborate. And frankly, this rook on a8 is doing absolutely nothing. So, not a very good maneuver. And here, white went in with bishop takes h6, which is just an excellent, excellent try, and frankly, a move I saw immediately after playing queen c8. The point is that the queen cannot recapture the rook because of knight g5 check forking. And after g takes h6, which is forced, my king side is super, super sensitive. And all my pieces are on the wrong side of the board to support the king. So, even though the computer might say I might be able to try to defend this position, it looks really, really bad and really, really tough to defend, and I don't buy it. So, why don't you pause the video for a second and try and figure out the next few moves for white to continue the attack, because the attack comes and it is powerful and dangerous. So I'll give you 5 seconds to pause the video and think about it. All right, so after g takes h6, Christopher went for queen d3 check, and it's not that hard to see. You challenge this king with check, you get this rook over, and you have both these rooks steaming down the e-file. The knights are clumsy. You can potentially sack an exchange with rook takes e7, and all that's left is for the knight to get in the game somehow, and it will. It'll get in the game. I went king g7, and now rook ae1 comes, and you can see basically there's 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces in on the action on my king, and at the moment I only have my knight defending. So you pretty much have a 4-on-1, and this is how attacks happen a lot of times. If you just do that simple count, you understand that this isn't really going to be defensible. And now the immediate threat is actually just rook takes e7, just giving up the rook for the 2 pieces and then keeping the attack going. White does have to be wary of the back rank issue. I might have a rook b1 sighting. So, but if black is if white is alert and doesn't allow black that back rank stuff, there's just nothing going here. I went queen d7, trying to just hold this knight together and potentially being my rook over. Apparently, the computer thinks that queen f8 is the much better move and thinks I can try and fight on a little bit. The point is that after queen c3 check, king g8, and queen takes c5, I can go rook b6, and I'm barely holding on to everything. My rook can potentially defend horizontally. It's also defending this knight here. But the line continues. Knight h4, this knight finally just tries to come in. The computer's saying I can try and fight for a little bit, but I'm not buying it because there's just a clumsiness with my rooks and my knights that makes it very difficult to move pieces. And now, if white just gives himself an escape square with h3, he could even consider rook e3 and rook g3 swinging along the 3rd rank. And it's just really tough. And the other thing is now white also has 2 pawns for the piece already. So, he wins a few more pawns. I'm not going to have any pawns left. So, it is just tough to handle. So again, I went queen d7, and now white went in for the death blow, queen c3 check. And yeah, I went king h7, scooting away. But now queen f6 came very quickly. And in this position, Queen h6 is a threat. I can't parry it in any reasonable way, and so I actually resigned here. After I think 25 or 26 moves, just a really, really disaster of a crush. And just a bad way to end the tournament. Losing in round 9, you get a sour taste in your mouth. Kind of adds insult to injury. And it was a great attacking game by Christopher. But I must say, I played really, really badly, ignoring my development, moving my queen multiple times in the opening, not sensing the danger with my king on f8, and not being alert. And I think, frankly, it all comes back to not taking the round 9 game with the same type of urgency that I took the earlier rounds, because I wasn't necessarily in it as far as my tournament was going. So that was definitely something I thought about in the future was, you know what? Round 9, or even any round really, isn't the time to try a line you haven't done enough of your homework on, because it's really risky and these players are too good. So if you're not investigating or doing the proper research, you're going to get smashed. So, and this was also the second tournament in a row in which I lost in the last round, because I'd lost in the last round to Advait Patel in Texas at the Southwest Class. So, again, take every game seriously. Don't take anything for granted. Losing 5 or 6 points in the 9th round is just as significant as losing 5 or 6 points in the 3rd round, even though it might not feel that way in the moment. And at my level, frankly, points are hard to come by. So you don't want to just drop games casually, because it matters. Anyways, I'm going to stop that rant there. You get the picture. It was not a good ending to the tournament. I was on -2 for the event. And, back to the drawing board for the next event. All right. Thanks for watching. Please like and or subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the Road to Grandmaster journey, please do so by making a donation in the PayPal link in the description below. Take care.